You want to pick up on that and talk about the second?
Sure.
Go ahead.
So the second challenge that I see with driving out this technology and really trying to get extracting the full benefit of what blockchain and the distributed nature of control it provides is really getting a bunch of folks to agree, right? When you're talking about, some of the power of blockchain, or if you look at, let's say, Bitcoin, it facilitates transactions between non-trusting entities. And it ledgers everything, and everyone kind of is in a line with, hey, this is Bitcoin, this is how we exchange it, this is the value we're exchanging. When you're talking about trying to leverage blockchain to create, let's say, a consortium, where you have to agree on something as simple as medical records, to make sure that, to try to first convince folks that, my information won't be taken from the other folks as they're sharing it, and that it really is patient-centric. That there's value that they're going to extract out of this, meaning they're going to incur costs to enable it, but what benefit are they going to get out of it? And this is something that they clearly measure, or is it just a nice to have, nice to take care of people? And when you're dealing with companies that are working on a quarter-to-quarter basis to ensure profitability, to say, hey, you're investing in the future, it's a tough sell. And then also just something as simple as formats and data schema. People store things, organize content in a much different fashion. When you're basically trying to say, hey, I want to get data records from an Anthem, a Humana, United Healthcare, finding those records is going to be a major challenge, because especially when less and less folks are using Social Security, what is that common identifier that says, John Smith, this is John Smith's record over in the Humana's data, this is John Smith and the UHC and then Anthem. How do you piece that all together? Because there's going to be a lot of John Smiths. They're all going to have a lot of overlap in terms of address numbers, phone numbers, and you can't afford to make a mistake. You cannot share the wrong information with that person. You're going to hit those type of challenges when trying to consolidate information from multiple sources. Is that people, just trying to do it within a company, try to blend company's information around one person is difficult, because you might spell the name different in one system than you do another. So how do you pair it? That issue and that challenge is going to be multiplied by 100 times when you're trying to integrate data sources from 4 or 5 different entities, when they designed those data sources to be for them and not necessarily for them to share it in the future. So.
Awesome. When you excuse me, when you look at blockchain just as a technology, where do you think we are in terms of maturity of it?
I think, to me, it's progressing a little bit slower than what I would say, than I was expecting. From the context of when I came to this show, I started with CubeChain a little over a year ago, and my first exposure to blockchain was literally this show. Okay, the first time I sat through sessions, I listened to, hey, we're going to change the world by doing X, Y, Z with blockchain. I was hearing all these fabulous ideas on how we're going to share this, build this consortium around that. And then I come to this year's show, and the conversations around those consortiums, there's some headway being made by certain groups of folks sharing little bit for bits and pieces, very discrete, something as provider data. But there's not really, I haven't really seen the big inroads into conquering medical records or something a little bit more broad and complex. So I think we're headed with the blockchain and actually progressing it. I think we're at our infancy still, but I do see that the headway being made in certain particular use cases that don't depend on the consortium model, right? Where they're taking advantages of benefits outside of, hey, it can grab, disaggregate disparate data, pull it together to display for an individual. You start seeing some things where they're interjecting pieces of blockchain into what the presentation from our HHS around. Now, it wasn't a big part of their solution. It was very narrow, but it played a part into making that product better. I think that's where you're going to start seeing some of the real use cases being deployed first. Is not a full blockchain solution that basically takes advantage of all the features. It's going to be, here's a solution that's going to take advantage of perhaps some kind of cryptocurrency that can be tracked at the currency piece level versus it being a database ledger. Or here's something that's keeping track of transactions occurring between two parties, and the data is out in the open for them both to see. I think you're going to see more of those type of use cases deploying now, which is a good thing, because once you start seeing some real live use cases being used, and people say, "Wow, that blockchain can do this. It's enterprise grade. It's secure. We don't see any problems with it." More companies will be open to doing things with it. And then with the companies that have already started, integrating that product or this feature into their solutions, they're going to be able to now accept deeper and deeper use of blockchain technology. So instead of focusing specifically on how I can do a ledger and I can expose data, oh, now I'm going to do a ledger, and perhaps I can now, use a cryptocurrency with it, not the Bitcoin currency, but more of a self-contained currency that doesn't necessarily go up and down in value, but takes advantages of a pure cryptocurrency versus it just being a database ledger. And then after you get those deployed, then it makes sense to, okay, well, perhaps we can automate certain functions with smart contracts now that we have all the pieces in place to do it. And you start off with maybe some third, one of your smaller divisions and on a process that's relatively minor to prove the fact that it works, it's scalable. And then you build more and more smart contracts, drive out more and more use cases within an enterprise. And before you know it, you actually have, blockchain being used in its full capacity within an enterprise. But I think we're still, a few years from seeing, that in any large size enterprise. Any bank will certainly be, towards the, later stages of that. But I do think you'll start seeing it, advance a little bit faster in smaller companies, slower in bigger ones, and the bigger ones I think we're years away. Smaller ones, we're going to get these use cases in there relatively soon. We're going to get some use cases of KubeChain into some bigger companies, relatively soon. But do I think we're going to have like full-blown crypto solutions within these enterprises? No, I still think we're a few years from that.
When you you talk about the importance of you coming to an event like this at Distributed Health in the past, and how that played into your journey with this whole industry, seeing things like this collaborative book that HIMSS is distributing, seeing just a common theme that was kind of hammered on here this week of collaboration. Mm-hmm. Do you see that being an important thing going forward to push things forward in the industry? Is that something that you all are looking for?
Yeah, the beauty of it is that last year you didn't see that, right? I mean, you heard a lot of folks that were on talk about maybe doing some little pilots here and there where it's the state and but you didn't hear companies doing it. So the fact that you're actually starting to see that, actually real use cases where they're really thinking about it, planning together, I think is a very positive step forward to getting this driven out. And once those companies, you have 3 competitors basically collaborating on a directory. And once they kind of define everything, the formats that this is going to be in, what we're going to share, how we're going to sanitize records that are coming into this process, it's going to be a lot easier to bolt on other users onto that product. So they're essentially setting up the foundation for a much broader, bigger solution. And it was actually pretty enlightening or very positive, because to see companies actually do that type of collaboration. The only other time I've seen anything close, when we used to do risk management and try to mitigate fraud within the financial industry, we would have some of that type of dialogue going on from one fraud leader to another, because it was mutually beneficial to both, and it wasn't necessarily a competitive advantage for either. In this same situation, when you're talking about a directory, I guess it's a problem that both have. It is something that I guess they could differentiate themselves to a point, but at the end of the day, it's not a big enough reason, I don't believe, that will necessarily stop people from collaborating, right? That relieves us. I can't share our secret way of doing this because we're all having the same problem. There's no one you can't solve that problem by itself. So yeah, I do think that actually to start seeing that, and it's actually real. That was a real positive sign that I'm seeing, and I wouldn't be surprised if you see a few more folks bolt onto that effort by the time we step in these rooms or enter this conference next year.
Looking into 2019 and beyond, what are some things that really excite you?
I believe what excites me in 2019 is that by the time we all get back here and we sit down and we start talking, I talked a little bit about the collaboration that happens with the consortium, but I believe you'll start seeing some real product out there. It might not be fully deployed, might not be, but you'll see some real use cases out there that are deployed within big enterprises. And maybe not full feature, but leveraging blockchain technology out there in the open, where now we can start gathering the data and say, hey, this is the type of impact it had here. Let's use the same technology for you because you have a similar type of problem. But you kind of need that book of actual cases deployed showing value in order for I think this industry to really blow out. Because until people see that, everyone's always going to be a little bit skeptical because they just don't understand, right? I mean, it's brand new. The folks in the IT room, they're not. This is new for them. You're talking in the business side of it or operational side. They don't see that there's a problem that this is gonna. They don't have like a obvious problem that say, hey, we definitely need this. They're going to need to see, oh my gosh, they were able to take this process here that was highly manual. They were able to, is a transactional data, send it over here, automate pieces of it, and now I don't need 3 people over here. By having real life use cases of how smart contracts saves money, how it facilitates agreements between 2 parties that don't trust each other, but these are things that right now are probably paper-based. Once they start seeing these things start flowing on a smart contract, then it's scalable and they have big names behind it, right? If we can have an Anthem deploy something that's related to blockchain, that people can say, wow, that's a big company. They're not necessarily, they can't afford to take the same risks as, let's say, some small entity, but they're doing it. That gives credibility to the technology. So then I think, the next time that you start talking to a Coca-Cola or some other non-related, they can say, wow, you're deploying real blockchains there, it's adding value. You're no longer having the same headways of trying to say that blockchain's not Bitcoin, right? Your conversation is now going to be, hey, blockchain did this for them. What can it do for you? And it'll slowly progress over the years. Next year, I'm excited to see some of the use cases at the next level, or some of these companies here that are on the edge of getting something out have full-blown products they can talk about, because I think it's coming, and I think it's coming within probably the next 12 to 24 months for most of the companies out there that I've heard today or over the past 2 days.
That's awesome. When you think about the readers coming into this book, whether they're on a more elementary understanding of blockchain technology in healthcare, or they're at the pinnacle of it, what are some just kind of in conclusion thoughts or comments that you'd like to leave them with?
I think there's multiple levels of understanding of blockchain that people need to know. From a technological viewpoint, where you're evaluating something as something like, well, how secure is it? How do we deploy the equipment? You're going to need to learn it at a much deeper level. But when you're more on the business side, you just want to understand what this technology can do. I wouldn't focus as much on the nuts and bolts of how it's doing it, but really the business value that it's delivering. So when you're reading the book, based on what your level or what your position is within a company, if you're on the business side of the ledger of a company, focus on what business challenges are people overcoming with the technology, and don't let the fact that this is a somewhat newer emerging technology hinder you from that thought process, because that will limit you in terms of, as you're looking for different use cases within your organization, that will limit you in terms of what you actually focus on. Take the book, learn enough, just at the big picture of the power of this technology, and then look for use cases, and then, then call some of these folks that have been using the technology for a little bit longer and say, hey, I see this potential use case within my company. Let's brainstorm a little bit and see whether it's real or whether I'm missing something here. And then eventually they'll have even a deeper understanding. They can further evangelize the technology within their organization, and you're off and running. But books like this, it's critical because people need to understand at least some of the fundamentals in the big picture before they can identify it. You don't want to just say, okay, well, I know blockchain can do ledger. I know blockchain can do this. Because by itself, it's going to make your viewpoint in terms of its power very narrow. But by reading a book that kind of walks through all, the multifaceted improvements that blockchain can make, can really open your eyes and say, hey, you know what? We certainly have this type of problem. Let me see whether blockchain can work with us.
Awesome. Anything else that you want to add or want to talk about?
No, I mean, I after working, probably 15 years or 12 years in the FI space, and doing some consulting before that, just see something brand new out here like this. And I say it brand new, even though it's been around a while. I say brand new because really the value of what the technology can do has not been fully realized yet. There's still a lot of greenfield out there to me in terms of what it can do and how it can not just make a small change to a process, but how it can literally just like completely replace it. And so to me, I talked a little bit about slowly implementing it, but if you do like a multi-generational plan, the multi-generational plan may not just be these small little incremental improvements. It could just be literally this whole process is now been replaced. And so, no, I'm really excited to see where this thing goes. I know it's been a little bit longer than maybe some folks might have thought it might be progressing at, but the progress is happening. Healthcare has been a very, I would say, you look at the FI space, it's been relatively narrowly defined and used. To me, the use case types I'm seeing in healthcare are much broader, more diverse, and so I think that it's sky's the limit. It's going to take some time, but the way things are happening today are going to be substantially different than what they're going to look like, let's say, 5 years down the line. But it's just going to take some baby steps to get there.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Appreciate your time.